Hi guys, Olive here today to show you some of my favorite cookbooks. If you've never heard me talk about this before, I love to cook. It is the primary reason why Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It's why I love hosting dinner parties. It's why I watch so many food-related shows on television. I think cooking is a kind of magic because if you have just the right ingredients, if you have some skill on your side and you have a heat source, you can create something that is so much more than the sum of its parts. I didn't grow up within a family that particularly liked cooking. There was always a vibe I got off of my family members that we cook because it's something we need to do to survive. Not necessarily because anyone finds any joy in it. When I became a teenager, I did develop an interest in baking. There was a very brief window of time where I thought I might go to culinary school to be a pastry chef. I quickly moved on to other interests. But once I got out of college and I started living with my now husband, I realized that I didn't really have a lot of cooking skills. So I started to teach myself, and I was using a lot of online resources. Because of that, I really got in the habit of looking up recipes online, which I still do all the time. But ironically enough, I didn't use cookbooks all that much. I couldn't really say why. I think it's just I was used to looking online to find all of my recipes. But recently, I've started using cookbooks more. I would check one out from the library, and then if I really loved that, I would then get my own copy to have here in the house and use, and I wouldn't have to worry so much about getting it dirty. And it's actually been a really nice process for me. I have started seeing the joy in using cookbooks. It's really nice to have the book there. They're beautiful also. So I actually thought today I would show you the cookbooks that I will be using, have been using. I'll talk about some recipes that I love from these cookbooks, and then there are also a few cookbooks on my wish list that I thought I would mention as well. I'll start with a newer addition to my collection that I've been exploring over the past few weeks. It is the Complete Cooking for Two cookbook by the editors at America's Test Kitchen. It is just me and my husband here, so while I do sometimes make meals that are meant for way more than two people, because it is really nice to have leftovers, it is occasionally really nice to just make a dinner that is specifically portioned to serve two people, so that way our fridge is not exploding with Tupperware. This has 650 recipes for pretty much anything you can think of. All three meals, salads, side dishes, breads, desserts, even things for the slow cooker. There are some cookbooks out there that are more specialized, but this one is much broader. What I like about it is that you can flip back to the index, you can find an ingredient, and then see what recipes that specific ingredient is used in. And because this is such a hefty cookbook, there are so many ingredients represented. For instance, I just picked up some farro, which is a grain. I got it from the Pennsylvania Macaroni Company in Pittsburgh's Strip District. Highly recommend checking it out. It's this beautiful, huge Italian store in the Strip District. It's definitely worth stopping into if you're ever in Pittsburgh. But I've had farro before, but I can't say I've ever cooked with it. So I didn't have the first idea what to do with it, but then I just flipped back to the index and I found a mushroom and farro ragu that I'm going to be making this week, actually. That whole section on vegetarian mains, I'm probably just going to cook my way through. They all sound fantastic. I also know there's a recipe for stuffed acorn squash with barley that I want to take advantage of while winter squash are still in season. This is just going to be such a fantastic resource for me that I can mine for recipes for years to come. Another newer addition to my cookbook collection that I've actually already been using fairly regularly is called Plant You by Carly Bodrug. I follow this author on Instagram. Her whole thing is, number one, plant-based cooking. But then the second thing that I would say she's most known for is minimizing food waste. So using up things in your fridge or finding uses for things that you would normally throw away as you're cooking. That's her whole deal. And I really, really like her Instagram. And I saw as she had this book coming out, she was promoting it. She was giving some sample recipes from the book. So I decided to pick it up and I'm really, really glad I did. I still have a lot of exploring to do in this one because I did get it fairly recently. I haven't had it for too long, but I already love these fritzy fritters. These use up some common items that you likely have around the house. You essentially grate up a bunch of veggies and make a slightly spicy fritter out of them. You can add more or less spice depending on your taste. I made this a lot this summer. I would make these during the same week as I made a tomatillo kimchi soup. So I already had kimchi around. I'd make a batch of these and then pop 2 in the air fryer for breakfast. But lately I've also been loving these super loaded harvest bowls. Since apples are in season right now, as are pumpkins, I actually roast my own pumpkins to make puree. And then I also roast the seeds, which work great as a topper for this bowl. These kinds of grain bowls, Buddha bowls, I've heard them called before, where you essentially have a base of a serving of some kind of grain, and then you put lots of fruits and or veggies, sometimes a protein, and then a small amount of dressing on top. That is my favorite kind of meal these days. In the summer, I make one with beets and edamame, plus some other things, and then with a homemade green goddess dressing. Very nutritious, very filling, and this harvest bowl was a hit in my house. Speaking of veggies, though, I also have Vegetable Heaven by Molly Katzen. I checked out a different cookbook from this author. I think it's the Moosewood Cookbook. I checked that out from the library around this time last year. I was looking for some ideas for some more colorful side dishes for Thanksgiving, and that was a great resource. But since then, I found this used copy, and I think I'm going to be using this one for Thanksgiving this year. You can see already a lot of these have intrigued me. I think soon I'm going to be making this black-eyed pea and squash soup. I have some dried shiitake mushrooms in my pantry right now that I'm trying to work my way through. And again, winter squash is in season right now, and it's one of my favorite things. Also, I just love soup. I think I've also decided to make these savory corn cakes for Thanksgiving. Not the healthiest thing in the world, but it is Thanksgiving, after all. I will be using green pepper instead of red, though, even if the color won't be as appealing, because I just don't like any other color of bell pepper besides green. I've tried to like red pepper. I don't even really like paprika all that much, unless it's smoked, and that's just because I like smoky flavor. And actually, I'll probably add some smoked paprika to these for some extra flavor. Probably some garlic too. Everything can use garlic. But from veggies to fruits, I have to show you what is probably my Bible this time of year. It is the Apple Lover's Cookbook by Amy Traverso. I originally checked this one out of the library. I got it around the time I did my 2 books on apples video, which is still one of my favorite 2 books on videos I've ever made. But I checked this out from the library and I loved it so much that I had to go out and get my own copy of it. At the start of this cookbook, the author talks about 70 different apple varieties. She talks about where they sit on the tart to sweet spectrum. And then in every individual recipe, she'll tell you what kind of apple will work best for it. Not that you're shackled to that specific variety of apple or specific type of apple. She's just suggesting how to get the best results with these recipes. I swear by her apple pumpkin walnut muffins, although I don't put quite as much sugar in them as she's calling for here. I think in my last batch, I halved both the brown and white sugars and they tasted perfect to me. And I use Jonagolds, which is my favorite variety of apple. I wait for them all year long and they are perfect in these muffins. I also use quite a bit of Penzeys pumpkin pie spice, but then again, I do like things pretty spicy. Also for Thanksgiving, I think I'm going to try out a recipe in here that I've had my eye on for a very long time. It's this green apple and Sauvignon Blanc sorbet. I love apples. Sauvignon Blanc is my all-time favorite wine, and this seems relatively easy to make, just like blend and then freeze it. But back to a broader cookbook, I really do like the Essential Eating Well cookbook. There are so many nutritious and delicious recipes in here. This summer, I made the penne with asparagus and lemon cream sauce. Cream sauce essentially meaning a ricotta mixture, like watered down ricotta cheese. I had a lot of basil in my garden, and this was a really great way to utilize it. And of course, you can use a penne made of chickpeas or lentils if you're looking to get more protein in. And then again, for Thanksgiving, I'm thinking about making this cornbread and apple stuffing. I am terrible at making traditional stuffing. I don't know why. It's just one of the small handful of dishes that I can't seem to master. French toast is another one of those. But cornbread stuffing, I've had much better results with. But then again, I don't know if I want both corn cakes and cornbread in one meal. That might be a bit much, but this does look fantastic. I adore golden raisins, especially in savory dishes. And this would be another opportunity to incorporate apples in the meal. Maybe I just need to have an apple theme this year. But the last one from my collection that I wanted to show you is actually one from my childhood. We did not do a lot of fancy cooking, but we did have the American Country Inn and Bed and Breakfast Cookbook. This is a collection of recipes used by inns and B&Bs from all over the country. I have no idea if any of these establishments still exist. Hopefully some of them do. As an adult, I have marked up some that I would like to try making, but the one I remember most from my childhood is this recipe from Murphy's House Bed and Breakfast in Montana. This coffee cake recipe, not the apple one, just this plain one. This is the one I remember us making when I was growing up. We would have this sometimes on the weekend. I think I even made it by myself when I was a kid. Sometimes I would climb up on the counters to reach the ingredients that were too high up. I don't ever remember us separating the eggs though. I don't think that was a skill I personally possessed as a young child, so I'm sure I didn't. I know how to do it now, and I'm sure actually following the recipe and doing that now would make this even better. But as is, it is just a good, solid recipe. But then there are 3 cookbooks on my wish list currently that I am dying to get my hands on. One of them was just released fairly recently. It is a brand new release called Stacked: The Art of the Perfect Sandwich by Owen Hahn. And from what I hear, this author is apparently really big on TikTok. I wouldn't know. I don't particularly like TikTok. I tried to get into it. It's just not for me. But HarperCollins was teasing this cookbook and several other cookbooks that they were going to be releasing. It was toward the end of the summer. They were posting about these cookbooks on Instagram, sharing some sample recipes. And the one they shared from this one was for these grilled shrimp and tomatillo street tacos. You may have heard me mention this once or twice over the years, either here on my channel or elsewhere on social media if you've been following me for any length of time, but I grow my own tomatillos. I grew them every single summer, and the reason I started doing that is because I needed a replacement for tomatoes, which for many, many years had been making me sick whenever I ate them, so I gave them up, replaced them with tomatillos. I actually think I might be tolerating tomatoes again, but that's a different story, and I also don't want to jinx it. But suffice it to say, I love tomatillos, and I always have so many of them every single summer because they grow into these monster plants and produce all of this fruit. It's really nice to have recipes that I can use them in. So that caught my eye with that particular recipe, and also that recipe has a red cabbage slaw on top, and I love red cabbage. I was also really happy that they advertised that this cookbook, while about sandwiches, and I love a good sandwich, I'm glad they showed that it's more than just sandwiches. I suppose you could say that a taco is a kind of sandwich, but definitely not going to get into a philosophical debate on that one. But since I mentioned soups earlier, I of course need my own copy of Every Season is Soup Season by Shelley Westerhausen Worsel. I found this one on Edelweiss of all places, and it called to me. And I'm thinking I might actually be able to make most of the recipes in here now if I'm going to be able to start reintroducing tomatoes into my diet. That is still blowing my mind. I swear, soup, especially with some crusty bread on the side, that has got to be the ultimate comfort food. I love making soup. I think I make at least one per week, especially during the winter months, but I even make some during the summer. I make a big old pot of it, and then we have leftovers for the entire week long. I love it. It gets even better after it sits for a while. It's actually a kind of dream of mine to open up my own soup shop someday. I've never really wanted to be a restaurateur, but I was inspired when we took a trip to Bloomington, Indiana. There was this adorable little soup shop called Darn Good Soup that has since closed. It was a victim of the pandemic, but I swear they had everything right. Their soup was delicious. Their business model looked really solid, as long as they had customers, that is. I really wanted to franchise it and bring it to Pittsburgh because I loved it so much. I actually still make some soups that were inspired by what I ate there. I make a curried lentil and spinach soup that was inspired by them. And I'm sure I could find even more ideas from this cookbook for the soup shop I hope to own someday. And then finally, since I know I mentioned at the start of this video that I'm a big fan of food-related TV, I am specifically a really big fan of MasterChef. Their early seasons are my all-time favorite. I watch the newer seasons, but there was a special magic to the older seasons. And season 5 was my favorite, especially because my all-time favorite contestant was on season 5. He came back in a later season as well, the Back to Win season, but his name is Christian Green, and he is from New Orleans. He has a cookbook out that I would really, really like to get. It's called Christian Southern Roots Cookbook. This is a shorter one. I think there are only 25 recipes in here, but I think Christian also opens up, talks a little bit about his life and his background, which I'm really looking forward to. I know this will be kind of a new adventure for me. I don't do a lot of Southern cooking. I am a proper Yankee, but it won't take too much convincing to get me to try a baked mac and cheese. So those were some of the cookbooks from my collection and from my wish list. I know this is a little bit of a different kind of video for me, but cookbooks are still books after all, and these are ones that play a pretty big part in my day-to-day life, so I really wanted to share them. Let me know if any of these interested you. I would love to know if you'd like to get your hands on them, and also let me know down in the comments what your favorite cookbooks are. I could always use some recommendations, some new ones to check out, maybe take out of the library, and then eventually buy if I find some really good stuff in there. All the books that I spoke about today will be listed and linked for you in the description box below for your clicking convenience. And at the very bottom of the exact same description box, you'll also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, like Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and doing right now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.